Hi, I'm Jeannine Amber. I'm a journalist and book collaborator, and my last project was working with Loni Love on her great memoir called I Tried to Change So You Don't Have to. And you are tuned in to So Booking Cool.
So booking, so booking, so booking cool.
There's so motherfucking cool to listen to so fucking cool.
Welcome to So Booking Cool, it's Jewel B. In this episode, I chatted with a professional who has been helping people tell their stories for more than 2 decades. She is a multi-award winning journalist, including a Front Page Award, 2 Henry Luce Awards, a GLAAD Media Award, a Maggie Award for Media Excellence, 8 Salute to Excellence Awards from the National Association of Black Journalists, and 10 New York Association of Black Journalists Awards. She's held senior editorial positions at Vibe and Village Voice. For over 20 years, she's worked at Essence, both as a contributing and senior writer. She's also written for Time Magazine, Glamour, BET's online sex column, and The Source, just to name a few. She's educated both graduate and undergraduate journalism students. She is a wide-ranging media consultant, and she is a book collaborator of many titles, including Rabbit, a memoir by Patricia Williams, which was nominated for the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literature. It was also among the list of Amazon's Best Biography or Memoir of 2017, and Shonda Rhimes called it a must-read. She co-wrote Nobody's Victim, Fighting Cycles, Stalkers, Pervs, and Trolls with attorney Carrie Goldberg. This title was named one of the best nonfiction books of 2019 by Esquire. In 2013, she collaborated on Love Him or Leave Him, but Don't Get Stuck with the Tab by award-winning comedian and talk show host Loni Love, and now Loni's new book, I Tried to Change So You Don't Have to, True Life Lessons. In this episode, here is Jeannine Amber. Stay tuned for our conversation right here, only on So Booking Cool. So I Tried to Change So You Don't Have to. The book is currently a multi-bestseller on Amazon, the #1 new release in television performer biographies. It's been #1 in comedy, biographies of comedians, the self-esteem, self-help category, the discrimination and race category, and Apple Books ranked it as a June must-listen. So how does this feel to have this kind of recognition early on for a book that you have been a part of, Jeannine?
Well, first of all, I take no credit. This is all about Loni. She is so charismatic and she's so warm and her story is so interesting that, I mean, as a collaborator, it's always about the other person and the story they're telling. And I'm really just, helping them tell, the thing that they want to put out there to the world. I'm the person who helps, but of course it is always a great feeling when the book does well, because it means that I accomplished my goal, which is to help them have a successful book. So I'm very excited. I'm very excited for Loni to have this moment, because I know this really meant a lot to her.
And how did this collaboration come to be? Because of course, we know that you guys collaborated on Love Him or Leave Him, but Don't Get Stuck with the Tab. Did you know that you would be working together again for another book?
Well, we had a really good relationship when we worked on that book a few years ago. And that was a dating advice book. And it was really fun. And, there are a lot of laughs in there. And I know, and Loni and I, we've stayed in touch and we're friendly. And she always knew there was another story that she wanted to tell. She wanted to tell her story, her life story. And so she was really in a great position to do that. And so when she was ready and when our schedules, worked out, it was the perfect timing. But I think this was always sort of in the back of her head. When you write a memoir, it's all about the timing. And this was the right timing for her. So we made it happen.
Yeah, timing. Absolutely. So can you just enlighten us more on how one can really see and feel that this is the perfect timing to release a memoir?
Well, there are a lot of things that go into it. First of all, you have to have a story to tell. There are people, I think, who feel ready to tell their story, in their 20s. And I've only read maybe one memoir that was written by someone that young. Um, and it was because she had this crazy thing that happened to her as a teenager. She then went on and wrote more memoirs, but really you have to sort of see the arc of the story. So where are you going to start this memoir, and where are you going where are you going to take the readers? What is the resolution of the story? Because you can't write a memoir when you're in the middle of it. You need to kind of have gone through some sort of journey and accomplish some kind of goal and learn something. So when you're at that point, that's a good time to tell a story, when you can look back over the span of your life and say, and so here's what I learned. And I think that was very much what Loni was thinking. She had a message about self-acceptance and about having to sort of deal with the different hurdles that come your way in life, and persevering, and coming out the other side and becoming successful by not necessarily bowing to the pressure that other people put on you. And she felt really clear about that message by the time she wanted to sit down to write this book.
Right. Okay. That's very interesting. And speaking of, her message and what she's learned and wanted to share, what were some of the questions that you asked Loni when working on this book in order to get this book made?
Mm. Well, the way I like to work is to first figure out what the theme is, right? I think, there's this idea when you're writing a memoir that it's just like, here's what happened. And it's like this, and then that, and then this, and then the other thing. But it's not about the sequence of events. It's about the message and the theme, right? So you can have a life, and the theme might be about, like, you know, family, or love, or being a warrior, or whatever it is. You have to figure out what story you want to tell, so that you can then pick the anecdotes from your life that help you tell that story. So Loni, had a very clear idea about wanting to speak about, the sort of like the joys of self-acceptance, but the struggle it took to get there. And so we kind of went through and talked through all the different themes and all the points of her life where we can kind of explore that, like what happened when she was a child, and what happened in college, and what happened, in sort of relationships, and what happened to her with the cops, and what happened to her in the industry, and, with her career. And there were a lot of points where we could sort of explore some of these themes. And so that's how we sort of figured out what we were doing before we started, which I think is always a good thing to do.
Are there any expectations for I tried to change so you don't have to? It can be anything in terms of, yeah.
You mean expectations for when the reader, like for the reader, or what do you mean exactly?
Yes. So for the reader, what this book could mean, would there possibly be more books from Loni in the future? Like, just,
Well, I think that would be really exciting, of course, if she wants to do another book. But I think that her objective with this book was just to, give people hope, and also to make them laugh and to inspire them. We're in a time right now that is really, it's tough, and a lot of people are having to deal with very unexpected circumstances. So all of us are going through things that we had not anticipated for and had not planned for. And so, her story was really about, figuring out a way to move forward no matter what happens. Because no matter what they are, you will be dealt blows in your life, and you got to figure out, like, okay, how do I get back up? And so, I Tried to Change is very much about that, but also very funny.
Nice. So people are gonna, it sounds like they're gonna get like the full experience from reading this book.
Yeah, there are some moments I think are really surprising. You don't always know what they went through as a child. You don't know their backstory. So you're going to learn some stuff, but also, Loni is a comedian. So you're going to laugh also. Just, to me, the most important thing to get out of a book.
Right.
I like to be the person, I like to read like, that person on the subway who's reading and laughing out loud and wonder what it is they're laughing about. That's the kind of book I like.
Do you ever get kind of embarrassed or not wanting to get caught trying to see what the person is reading, or you don't care? You're in the
No,
industry, so.
the thing is, readers, people who love books, are always willing to talk about them. I have seen people reading books that I've just finished, and I immediately want to talk to them about it, even though we are on the subway and I've never met them before, and they might think I'm crazy, but I just, oh my God, isn't that a fantastic book? I love those conversations. And, so it was one of the reasons I was so excited to speak to you, because I thought, oh, she's a book nerd like me. I love it.
Yes, and I'm so glad to speak to you, Jeannine, like really. And you mentioned about conversations. So what are some of the conversations that you and Loni are hoping people will have from I Tried to Change so you don't have to?
I think, sometimes we look back on our past, or we don't appreciate the moment that sort of turned things around. That person that you met who you weren't anticipating would actually have an effect on your life actually really changes it. And so I think going back and sort of, being thankful for the people who helped you sort of move from one direction to another, and also maybe letting go of some of the things that you've held on to that, it's time to move on from that,
Yeah.
So
So as a book collaborator, what makes the best book collaboration? What do you look for?
well, it's interesting because every book collaboration, it's like a marriage between two people, and it can be like an arranged marriage, and you can know pretty early on whether or not something's going to work out. I have been very lucky in that the people who I have worked with are all wonderful, and we've all stayed in touch, and everything has been fine. But I've heard from other writers where they get a third of the way into the project, and they're just thinking, this was a huge mistake, I want a divorce. But for me, it's really about sort of each person respecting what the work that the other person is putting into it. I think there's this idea that somebody with a good story can just write a book about it, but that is very, very rare. It's just the same way somebody who's funny cannot get up on stage and do stand-up. Like, writing is a craft. There are things you have to know about how you construct a chapter or a paragraph or a book. They have a story to tell because they've been living another life, doing whatever it is they're doing, being a comedian or being a lawyer or being, an astronaut or whatever. You can't expect somebody who's devoted 20 years to a career to also on the side happen to have figured out how to write a book. And that's why they get collaborators. And, I will tell you, in the acknowledgments with the celebrity or, whoever the author is thanking people, you'll see a name there that you will not recognize. Then they'll say something like, thank you for listening to me, or whatever. They'll thank them in a way, and you'll think, I wonder if that's their ghostwriter or their collaborator, and you can Google that name, and you'll usually mystery solved, because that's a special skill. And most people who are out there living their life and doing their thing and becoming fantastic in another field, they didn't, like I said, they're not necessarily going to know how to also write a book. So that's what we do.
So do you recall when you first when you first came to know about book collaboration?
Well, I mean, as a writer, I can't remember a time when I first found out about it. I mean, it was just sort of something that I knew that people did. I did not know how common it was until I actually got into the industry. And that's when I realized, there are books that I had read years ago by, whoever, like a model or a singer or an actor. And I went back and I thought, wait a second. And I went to the back of the book and the acknowledgments, and then I saw up there, the first person they thanked. And then I Googled and I thought, oh my God, that's the person who got this story done. So it wasn't, it was sort of like a mystery to me in terms of how common it is. But I mean, it makes sense, right? So yeah, it's been actually interesting to also speak to other book collaborators about like their process, because we all work differently, and every person who we're writing with also works differently. So the whole industry, I guess, is its own kind of little world. And the way we work, because some people, the author, like, there's like a lot of back and forth. And so you'll write, so we're the writer and they're the author. So we will write stuff, and then some people, are really cool with it. Like once you sort of get the story and get the way the person speaks and how they talk and their, maybe whatever, like their syntax or their slang or their, the way their special turns of phrases, whatever it is, that you have to be a really good listener, because it's not just the story, it's also the person's voice. So if you're a collaborator, you have to write in the voice of different people. The book that I wrote before Loni's book was with a lawyer. She is, her name's Carrie Goldberg, and she is a victims' rights attorney, and she deals with a lot of victims of sexual assaults and sexual abuses, and particularly people who have been abused via the internet, like victims of revenge porn or doxing or harassment or extortion. And so that was a completely different book. It was a completely different, the author was very different, but also the material was very different. So the thing to me that I love most about book collaborations is you really sort of get to inhabit somebody else's world, and you get to learn all about sort of what happened to them, but also how they express themselves. And the thing I also find really interesting, you have to like interview people a lot. And sometimes in fact, this has happened almost every time I've worked with somebody, they end up sort of talking about things that they've never told anyone before, or piecing something together that they hadn't actually made the connection between this thing that happened, when they were 10 and this thing that happened when they were 30, and so there's a little bit of therapy involved, and like a lot of soul searching and a lot of digging. And, there have been times in every book where the person said, I'm not comfortable with putting that out there. And then we've had to have like, some kind of sessions where we just talk about, well, what if we put it out like this, or what is it that makes you uncomfortable about this, or how come, and it's my job to both serve the book. So what will work best for this book? And there are times when I've said to people, I really think that this story helps the book. I really think that this thing that happens to you will help readers understand the full scope of your life. There's that. And then that's part of my job. But at the same time, my job also is to, like protect the person. Like there's there have been times where people are saying stuff to me and they're totally heated or about whatever it is they're talking about. And like their anger is kind of coming out, and like, I don't know. Are you sure you want to say it exactly like that. Let's just think about this thing that you just said about, you know, your mother or your boss or whomever, you know what I mean? Like stuff, a lot of stuff comes out. So you have to sort of figure out, what are we going to do with all this information? What should go in and what maybe needs to go back inside your head, and don't ever tell anybody that again.
Wow. Wow,
I mean,
that's
so we are all entitled to keep we don't have to share every single thing with the world, but you know, I mean, at the same time, if you're not willing to share stuff that you've never shared with the world, then, you know, you shouldn't be working on a book. It's you have to be willing to reveal things, you know, so it's complicated, but fun.
so ahead of working on a book, like a book collaboration, do you figure out when you guys want to meet up and how you want to discuss and have these conversations? Is that something you guys discuss beforehand?
Yeah, well, everybody has kind of a different schedule. So, and like I said, all the people who I work with are doing, you know, their career, they're doing other stuff. So I work around their schedule. So sometimes it'll be like, okay, we're gonna have a standing Sunday call, and then that's like when I will interview them about whatever it is. Or sometimes their schedule is kind of more, you know, it's not so set. So we might talk on whatever day they're free. We can talk late at night or early in the morning or on the weekend. And I'm flexible. I go with however it is they want to work. And then, you know, you have to be flexible in this industry, but I don't mind it, because that flexibility also means I can be flexible. Like I don't like having like a sort of a 9 to 5. I like to kind of just, you know, work when I'm feeling most productive, which might not be middle of the day. It might be all day Saturday, and then Tuesday I want to go to the park. So, you know.
Have you ever worked on multiple collaborations at once?
I have had some overlap. You know, usually it's overlap in terms of working on a proposal, and working on a manuscript at the same time. You know, I don't think that's impossible, and I do know other writers who have done that. And I think that all depends on the type of projects you're doing, because when you're in a book, you really have to kind of be in it so you can sort of figure out, you know, the connections between things. And, you know, there are times when I'm walking down the street and I'll think, oh my gosh, that paragraph should actually move to this other chapter. But those kinds of thoughts only happen when you're just in it. It would be hard to sort of have that sort of, you know, those moments where you're putting things together or making connections, or, you know, that type of process thing, I think would be hard to do on multiple projects simultaneously. However, I do know that people do that, and I'm super impressed. The one thing I will say about it, though, that's interesting is about being a writer, that, you know, I remember a professor telling me like years ago when I was in grad school, and I didn't really get it until I got, you know, kind of much further along in my career, is that there's the writing that happens when you're sitting in front of your computer, and then there's the writing that happens when you're, you know, doing the dishes or vacuuming or walking the dog. Like, this stuff is in your head. It doesn't only get put together at the keyboard. It's getting put together and mulled through and thought about at all sorts of different times. And even to me, you know, many times I'm writing in the evening, and I'm just like really having trouble trying to figure something out or put pieces together, or just like getting a paragraph to work, and I go to sleep and I wake up and I go back to my computer. I'm like, oh, I know what to do. That isn't because I suddenly figured out what to do that morning. It's because that puzzle was being sorted out, you know, in my sleep or while I was brushing my teeth or when I was getting ready to bed. A lot of stuff happens when you're not at your desk. And so you don't want all that other time that you're not at your desk to get like cluttered with a whole bunch of other problems, because then you can't think anything through. So
That's so writing is a broad experience.
yeah. I think, it's funny because I think with some other work that people do, you finish the work and then you go home and you're not working anymore. Well, not now because we're all at home, but you shut off your computer and then it's not in your head. When I'm really, especially when I'm dealing with some really, really difficult subject matter, I'm in it all the time. So it's hard for me to do anything, even just like, oh, let's go out for dinner. And even though I'm not like physically at my computer, I cannot turn it off and just really engage in a lot of other things, which is something I think I need to work on, because I believe that is called work-life balance. But it's hard, and I know I'm not the only one, because I've talked to other writers about this, and it's almost like there's the writers who live in my neighborhood, and I'll see people on the street, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, I'm on deadline. And it doesn't mean I'm on deadline, I gotta run, I don't have time to talk. It means I'm on deadline and I cannot engage in a conversation with you because I'm having a lot of thoughts right now. That's what another writer will say to me, or I'll say to them, and it's like, no problem, got it, we'll talk another time. Like, you can't even, if you're really deep in something, it's hard to even like get into a conversation about something else. But that's only when you're working on something really, really complicated, and usually when you're stuck, which happens.
So with writing, do you download the information and what you want to say in your head first, and then just write all that down, or are you thinking as you write, or do you do both?
I generally have an outline, for what I'm going to do. And then I work through different, okay, so I start with a blank page. Let's say I'm working on a magazine article or a proposal or a chapter. I start with a blank page and I have a rough idea of the outline. So they're going to be whatever, 5 sections. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to go transition to that, and then etc. all the way through. And then I kind of block it out, and I do a really rough. It's so rough that no one else could read it. I mean, there are not even like full sentences at some points. It's just like, okay, yeah, and then I'm going to do that because I'm moving sort of fast, and I'm kind of seeing really big pictures. And then I go back and I keep working on getting the blocking right. Like, this paragraph actually has to move, and that's a lot of cutting and pasting and moving stuff around until I'm like, yes, this tracks, this comes after that, this comes after that, this comes after that. Okay, then that makes sense. Then I go back in and I actually like write the paragraphs like properly, and then that's another version. Then I go back and I look at each sentence, and that's another kind of read. And then you go back and you look at each word, like, is that the right adjective? Or what if I change this noun? Or, actually, I think this needs a little bit more description. So it's really about something coming into focus. It's all kind of, hazy at the beginning. It's kind of like big, amorphous shapes. And then they get tighter and crisper and cleaner until finally you have, a structure where you can see everything. But it's like I kind of just go over and over and over something again, which is why I do not understand how anybody worked with a typewriter. Because when you were working with a typewriter, you pretty well had to have the whole thing figured out and ready to go, start to finish, in full sentences and with complete ideas. I don't know. That's like a mystery to me. I don't even think I could write like a greeting card on a typewriter, because I'm constantly going back and changing stuff. I think it's a very different way of thinking. So I'm like amazed that people used to work without computers.
So you definitely prefer to write on a laptop or a computer?
Well, yeah, I mean, as opposed to, well, I will, you know what? I do actually take notes a lot. Like sometimes I do write longhand. I don't write the whole thing out. That's usually when I'm getting like just sort of ideas about how to approach something. Or sometimes I'll like think of a sentence and I'll write it down. And because I'll be thinking like, oh my God, that's it. That's the sentence. And then invariably I go back to it. I'm like, well, that's it's not that great. So that, and I have friends who actually write stuff into their phone or talk it into their phone and then like transcribe the audio just to kind of get the process going. But I think everybody sort of works differently. But yeah, I like to, type, but I also have to get up a lot. Like I can't just sit there for 8 hours. I type and then I get up and I walk around, I look out the window, I go back, I get up, I do some straightening up. Like I can't sit still and work. I have to be moving all the time.
Are you someone who can listen to music while you write?
No, I need like complete silence.
Yeah.
I have a daughter, and she, especially when she was little, she used to love to sing, and she would be in the background singing, and I would, if you don't stop singing, like you're making too much joyful noise behind me. I just everything is distracting. I need like silence. I live in New York, so I'm used to like, sirens or right these days, firecrackers, which I'm not sure what that's all about, but we have fireworks every night. And car alarms and people yelling. That doesn't bother me so much, but no, I can't listen to lyrics or people talking or a young child singing. None of that.
And when you are like at the park or wherever you may be, when you get an idea, like, oh, like as you mentioned, oh, this should go in this paragraph or this or that, how do you capture that? How do you save that moment so that you don't lose it?
I will keep repeating it over and over to myself, or I will, like, if it's like, oh my God, this is genius, I will be talking into my phone. I will definitely do that if I feel like it's just, I have to keep it. But like I said, I always go back to it. I'm like, yeah, that wasn't really that great. But sometimes it's not really the sentence. It's like the sentence is actually the springboard to a bigger idea. So, yeah.
And you mentioned writing community. So is that something that you were looking for, or did it just happen organically, including with other book collaborators as well?
Well, a lot of us worked in magazines. So I know people from back in the day. Like I've worked at a lot of different magazines, and you like keep in touch with people. It's nice to connect with other writers, and we talk about like our whatever our projects we're working on, or just I mean, you gotta like have people who you speak with, that like whom you're not really working with, you're just kind of commiserating with or comparing notes or complaining sometimes. I mean, like that's like what your friends are for, but a lot of us work in the same industry, so it's nice. It's nice. I
So
just went for a long walk around Prospect Park the other day with another writer. And it was great. We were both talking about the projects we were working on. And, she said something and I said, oh my gosh, I did a piece about that a few years ago. I have a ton of info. And so I got all this stuff for her because I happened to know something she was working on. And then she hit me up about something that she knew I was working on. And that's the other thing is that, it's like nice to share info behind the scenes too.
Info behind the scenes. Speaking of behind the scenes, do you have conversations with the editor when you're working on like a book collaboration?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, yes, they are. Yeah. I mean, the the manuscript goes to the editor. Usually, how I work is the editor will get the first few chapters, and then they talk about like, yeah, like I like this direction, or let's move it a little bit more like this, or do that, or whatever their feedback is, and then sometimes I'll, depending again on the editor, like some editors, I send them like one or two chapters, like as I'm working, so they kind of see what's going on, and especially if we're on a tight turnaround, or some of them, they want to wait till the whole thing's in, or they want like the first third at a time, or whatever it is. But you get feedback. I mean, that's the whole point of being an editor is when you're writing, sometimes you can't see where you need more explanation, or you need to go deeper, or something's unclear, or this part, maybe trim this part, like, so yeah, I love getting feedback from a good editor. I love it. That's an editor is the person who takes something from good to great. That's what they do.
How does the collaboration process really get started? Is it with like, does your agent, for example, contact you to see if you are interested, and then you guys go about finding a publisher? Or is the book signed on by the publisher first, and then, they're looking for you, like a book, collaborator?
Yeah, so that's interesting. There are a lot of different ways it can work, and I've actually done a few of them. So with Loni's first book, I was contacted by an agent. God, I'm trying to remember how that worked. That she'd seen my work in Essence. I was a senior writer at Essence, and she'd seen a profile I had done and said, "Hey, are you interested in doing collaboration?" And then, and then she actually became my agent. She was a literary agent. And then the second project I worked on, I actually brought an idea to her, and I said, I think this would be a great book. And then I worked with the author on the proposal, and then that went to publishers, and it got sold. And then I worked on that project. And then the third one, the book had already been sold, and they needed a collaborator. That's when I talked about working with the lawyer. And so then I came on to work with her. I think she met with a bunch of people and liked me the best. And then we entered into a relationship. So there are a lot of different ways that collaborators work. Sometimes we're in at the front end, right from the start, and we work on the book proposal. Sometimes we're brought in after the book is sold. And yeah, it all depends on the project.
With each new project that you work on, do you learn something about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know so much if I learned something about myself as much as I learned something about my process, right? Like, the thing about writing, and I'm sure this is true of any craft, is that the more you do it, the more you learn, right? And so I just had this conversation with another writer friend of mine, and we were talking about like all the different things that happen whenever you do a collaboration. Like in this one, you really learn about whatever it is, like integrating this type of material and that type of material, or having to deal with, moving in different time into different points in time, like what's the most elegant way to move back and forward in time, or how to deal with difficult, painful memories, or whatever it is. Like you learn something else about the process and the craft. And I love that because the more you do it, the more, the better you become. But also about myself, sometimes we will hit on a subject that makes me kind of, have to think about stuff I've had to deal with in my own life. But usually I'm trying to get the other person to have those kind of epiphanies. So I'm really, it's almost like I'm not, I'm not thinking about me. I'm thinking about them. Like, well, how did this make you feel? And what were you thinking? And, that kind of stuff.
What advice do you have for anybody who wants to get into publishing, magazine publishing, all of it?
Well, you have to really love what you do because, um, it's not an easy, it's not an easy career choice. But I think, just like with anything, when you love it, you can't really think about doing anything else. It's like the only thing you want to do. And you just got to keep moving forward and getting better at what you do. And the other thing, like the great thing about writing is you're never bored because the minute you finish one project, you start something else. I'm completely immersed in the world of, stand-up comedy in the 90s. Like it's like, that's what's great about writing is it allows you to go places and learn things that you wouldn't necessarily in your life. But, you have to really love it. And if you do this kind of work with collaborations, you really have to be a person who's willing to step back. It's not about you at all. Like, you're helping someone else tell their story. That's your job. And, you need to take pride in a job well done, but it's not about, like your own fame. It is about helping someone else, achieve this dream that they have of telling their story. And it's like a real honor to do that for people. So I love it.
What's the best or worst piece of advice that somebody could get when it comes to writing?
Well, the worst piece of advice is, I think, it's not really a piece of advice, but it's a thing that I hear people do when they're like, oh, I work better under pressure. Like, that is garbage. You may work under pressure versus you don't work when you don't have a deadline like looming. But I don't think anybody works better when they have less amount of time, because you are robbing yourself of the time you need to really make things as great as they can be. You cannot do that unless you give yourself time. So that whole idea of like, oh, I'm gonna like get it together at like midnight, I'll sit down and start working, that's crazy. And also you're tired. Like, give yourself time. So I guess my advice is give yourself time. So enough time, not just to get the first draft out, but the edit that you as a writer have to do of your own work. For me, that is the stuff that takes the most amount of time. So for every hour I spend sort of writing like kind of original, like blank page, I'll spend 4 hours fixing it up and getting it right and getting the right words in there. That part of the process takes a long time, and you gotta make sure you have a schedule for that. Do not try and rush the process. That's my advice. Time management.
Time management, yes. Time, that is excellent advice. Any upcoming projects that you can reveal at all?
Not right now. I have a couple of things that are pending, and fingers crossed that they all come true. So check back with me in a year. I'll let you know.
Absolutely. And on that note, Jeannine Amber, everyone. Thank you again, Jeannine Amber. And how can people keep up with you and stay updated and stay connected?
I'm on Twitter. I mostly just like retweet things that I think are really interesting, but you can reach me there also at Jamber Star, my handle. And that's it. And and my website is JeannineAmber.com. So it was really great speaking with you. Thank you so much.
Yes, it was my pleasure. Thank you for coming on. Would love to talk with you again in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
And thank you to all the listeners. Until next time, so booking cool.